All right, so let's finish off Unit 1 biology to talk about populations as a whole, and more specifically, we're going to talk about ecological populations and the factors such as really bad rhino mating that affect those ecological populations. But first, last 3 quick questions for Unit 1. Pause the video here. We're going to go through them together right now. So, first question is asked, what is negative feedback? Very important for homeostasis and stasis, and give an example in humans. All right, so negative feedback is a system in which an initial stimulus is lowered or dampened or lessened by the eventual response. Great definition. Doesn't have to be exactly like that though, but something along those lines. Lots of examples in humans. I like to talk about things like temperature, right? But you can talk about glucose control, you can talk about salts control, you can talk about different hormone regulations, because you can't talk about sex hormones, you can't talk about growth and stuff. But lots and lots of things, anything to do with homeostasis, really. What is the name of the tissue through which water flows in a plant? We're talking about water, so we must be talking about the xylem. And what provides the energy for the movement of the water? What provides the energy for the movement of the water is actually the sun. Okay, is what provides, and I'm going to say the sun and heat, right? Because evaporation provides that energy for movement through the xylem. Describe the difference between mutualism, parasitism, commensalism, and amensalism, providing examples for each. Okay, let's go to the difference. Say, let's go mutualism, parasitism, commensalism, and amensalism. All right, mutualism both gain, and by say both organisms that are involved gain. All right, parasitism, one gain, one lose. Commensalism, we have one gain and then one indifferent. Amensalism is where we have one lose and one indifferent. All right, so examples of each. Mutualism is probably one that we can have lots and lots of examples. My favorite's probably bees and flowers. Okay, parasitism, lots of examples as well. The mosquitoes drinking blood out of humans. Commensalism can have a few examples as well. For example, barnacles in whales you can claim as commensalism. And then amensalism on the last one, not too many examples, but probably the bread mold, the fungus that results in the antibiotic penicillin. That fungus just produces penicillin. It's a natural secretion of it has, but it also has the side effect that it kills lots of different types of bacteria. And that's obviously really bad for the bacteria, but the fungus doesn't actually care about that. All right, so in the study design, we're talking about the distribution, density, and size of a population of a specific particular species within a whole ecosystem, and also the impacts of factors including available resources, predation, competition, disease, chance environmental events, births, deaths, and migration. Let's go. So what's an ecological population? It's the number of organisms of the same species living in the same area at the same time. And this might be a population of giraffes that live in and use a specific watering hole, for example. All right, and that population of giraffes, we would count those individuals and they would form a population. But also, we could also claim to be a population the specific eucalypts, which are these trees that are in a specific area, for example, in the wider Glenelg Basin area. That might be a population of eucalypts, or you can talk about the population of eucalypts within a specific state park in the Glenelg Basin area. Okay, you can also talk about the populations of specific molds that might live on one of these eucalypt trees, and it might be a specific population in that big ecosystem. Okay. All right, so populations have lots and lots of different types of distributions. You've got uniform distributions, and that penguins are a funny animal that do uniform distribution in that they're quite able to, let's say if they live in a certain environment, they're going to, especially during laying season, they're going to set themselves up within pretty equal amount of space between each other. So they all have enough space, but they're also close together enough that they're protected. You can have random distributions. For example, if you're getting dandelions growing in your yard in the spring, all right, it's completely random where the seeds of those dandelions is going to get blown, and they're just going to grow in clumps in your yard. Okay, so that can be an example of random distribution. And then lastly, we have what's called clump distribution, and for example, elephants or those giraffes we talked about just before, they're going to move all together within their environment, all right, and that's why we call that clumped distribution. So there's different kinds of variables that affect the growth of population. All right, these four variables here are what we call the variables which can be determined. They're variables which can mathematically be calculated. All right, there's two variations in those two groups of variables. We've got the positive growth variables and we've got negative growth variables. Positive growth variables are births in the population and immigration, so migration into a population. Negative growth variables are the opposite of those, deaths in a population and immigration. Okay, and it's just like I said, we can calculate these things mathematically, and it's very simple. All you have to do is go that births plus immigration will equal deaths and migration. So in this example, you're going to have a stable population because births and immigration will equal deaths and migration. All right. So for example, if your number of births in a certain amount of time, so let's say a month, you have 10 births and you have 5 species immigrating in, and then you have 2 deaths, and then you also have, let's say, 13 of a certain individual species immigrating in. All right, 10 plus 5 is 15, 2 plus 13 is 15, so we have a stable population. If, for example, this immigration number went up to 10, we're going to have a growth in our population. So this, we would say that births and immigration is greater than deaths and migration. And it's the same if, for example, a big catastrophe happened and we had 20 deaths in our population, then this symbol would swap and we get this happening, okay? But pretty much we would indicate here stable growth or loss, okay? All right, so obviously these 4 factors, they're not going to be the only factors that are going to decide the size of a population, but even though these secondary factors, they actually contribute to the births, immigration, emigration, and deaths, okay, we have other factors, these secondary factors, to do that, all right? The first kind of factor is called density-independent factors. They're factors where all individuals within the population is going to be affected. A good example of this is natural disasters, like a bushfire. Right? Global warming, probably one of the best density-independent factors. Right? If there's a bushfire in a state forest, for example, all of the individuals, regardless of who they are going to be affected. And then we have density-dependent factors, where the change of this factor is going to change depending on the size of the current population and how dense it is. All right, and predation is a great example of this. Predation, right? And food availability as a whole is a great example of this, right? If there's lots and lots of antelope available, there's going to be lots and lots of cheetahs because of that bigger population of antelopes. As the population of antelopes decreases, there's going to be less and less cheetahs, okay? So the density of those populations is going to affect the size of the population as a whole. All right, we can graph these relationships between populations. We can graph populations in general. You guys did this at Ecolink, all right? But this is an example of a graph of the beaver population estimates between 1980 and 2011, okay? Different populations are going to be, because of things like predation, they're going to be very related to each other, okay? What we mean by this is a good example of a predator for the beaver is the coyote. So I'm going to show the coyote population in red. Okay, obviously the coyote population is a lot lower than the beaver population. Let's say in 1980 the coyote population might have started off at around 2,500. As the beaver population went up, can you see that there's a little increase here? Okay, the coyote population would have more beavers available, all right, so it would also increase, all right? And then the beaver population might have gone down, so what's going to the coyote population likely do? It's likely also going to go down. And it's likely you would see that a beaver and a coyote population would follow very similar trends. Okay, it wouldn't be perfect trends, all right? There would be a lot of other factors affecting this, but in general, we see that populations do follow each other's trends, okay? All right, there's two ways populations in general, they want to grow, all right? Species want to get bigger in their populations. That's the major goal of all species on Earth, have the biggest possible population without suffering. And there's two ways they do this. The first way is little r selected, all right? And I say little r just because that's how they write it. And you can also call this the quick and many strategy. And the best example of this are rats and rabbits, okay? Rats and rabbits, they have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of offspring. And what do? They don't care about those offspring at all right? They just let them, they grow a tiny little bit, and then they let them out in the wild, and they do their own thing, okay? What does this mean? Yes, most of the offspring of a rat die before they get to a few months of age, okay? But because they had so many offspring, this isn't going to have a huge effect, and they're still going to get a growth in the population, okay? So the pros, we could say, is that don't have to waste time on offspring. But the cons is lots die. Okay? On the other hand, the other kind of growth strategy is capital K selected, so K selected strategy, and this is just the opposite. It's slower and fewer. A great example of this is us humans and elephants. All right, an elephant is only going to have one elephant calf at a time, and they're going to spend a lot of time, and that's a, you ask your parents, that's a negative, right? So lots of time and energy. Okay? But the positive in this is that you can then make sure that your offspring is going to survive. So it's a higher probability of survival. Okay. Lastly, we want to be able to, as biologists, measure population sizes. There's lots of ways we can do this. You can use quadrats, which we'll be doing very soon. Quadrats. Okay. You can also use what we call a transect line. And you can also actually mix these two things together. Okay. So you can do both of these together. Okay. And that's what we get here. And then we can also do less. So these are very scientific methods, both quadrats and transect lines, very scientific methods of measuring populations, but this isn't always possible. And a great example of this is the red-tailed black cockatoo, where pretty much what I did is I had to drive through Durham State Park, and every 50 meters, 50 meters, I actually had to stop, turn my car off, and just listen for red-tailed black cockatoos, all right? Which is still a scientific method, but not quite as scientific as these two other methods. And then also these bandicoots here, that in Hamilton, they also measure the size of their populations by taking video data and such, and actually doing what we call catch and release programs by tagging.